Hello, all. My name is Tyler James, and I am an independent ethicist who focuses on medicine and emerging technologies. And true to form, I want to cover a subject that doesn't really have a lot of attention today, being the utilization of AI and cognitive technologies and how they impact our individual and societal rights and obligations to know and to have knowledge and to disseminate knowledge. So I'm going to just come and do a quick little disclaimer, um, just notifying y'all that the beliefs and opinions that I share here are not necessarily reflected by the institutions that I'm affiliated with. So now let me hop into the background of this subject. So obviously, we've been advancing as a society more towards more effective or efficient methods of interfacing with information, whether that be in the natural world, the written word, or in the computerized systems that we've developed. So, from the early computers to the wearables and implantables that we're seeing proliferate in society today. Now, the areas obviously that I want to touch on specifically are cognitive technologies. So think of virtual reality, metaverse, and then neurotechnologies, bionic prosthetics that interface directly with the nervous system. Now, both of these technologies can utilize artificial intelligence, be driven by them. So I'm just going to consolidate them all into the AI-driven cognitive technology bubble. And I know that's not necessarily the most appropriate, but I'm very short on time, so I'm not going to have time to delineate between neurotech and cognitive tech the entire time I am presenting here. So there's several different core issues that we do need to have very thorough discussions on still that we haven't necessarily taken out of other spheres like bioethics, forgotten, because that does feed into the conversation to some degree. My concern is that with the implementation of the large language models, utilizing them for chatbots and how we are being able to groom them, as it were, to disseminate specific propaganda, information, what have you. Depending on how you structure the LLM, it'll give you out a set of outputs that is tailored for that system. And we see the difference between ChatGPT and different systems that are out there commercially available and freely available to the public for use. Now, the problem is that we're creating affirmative systems, or that we are using them for comfort to affirm us of our worldviews. And there's a danger in that because if we don't have denials or refutations of truth and fact, respective to worldviews, respective to perspectives that we might develop and hold and share among another, we're going to create an environment much like we see with social media where we're siloing ourselves, where we put up barriers and it gets harder for us to be able to interact. And it gets harder for us to be able to empathize, sympathize with one another, and we just go into our corners and we just stay there. And that's an altogether negative for society because we are social creatures. And if we're only socializing with computers, that's kind of contrary to the point of, being able to engage and to create societies. So obviously, we're going to be able to use the prior technologies that have come before, social media being a good example here, and then take those techniques that we have developed to manipulate information, to cause chaos, to disrupt and harm, or cause good, obviously. But we're going to be able to take those into the AI-driven cognitive technologies, and if it's not properly regulated, it's going to cause a significant amount of harm. And while some might argue here in the US, we're having a very difficult conversation when it comes to what is truth, what is fact, what is opinion. We can see that on a more global scale and at a much more rapid pace than we saw with social media because obviously AI being as prolific as it is and as easy to manipulate as it is, we can see that at a much, much more accelerated pace. The span of weeks instead of years. Now, again, coming back to right to know, right not to know. Similar to the right to be forgotten, we need to bring this into the sphere of computer and informational sciences more because we have to have an understanding of what does a person have a right to know? What does a person have a right not to know? What are the obligations that they have to society and vice versa? That brings me to this whole segment on classifying information content and the very, very complex and nuanced discussions that exist within this sphere. Because how do we define fact? What is false? What is appropriate? And appropriate for whom? And for which aspects of society? What is bias? How do we ensure that bias? I hate to say positive censorship, but the antonym, I guess you could say, of censorship in the sense such that content that is harmful or negative or destructive to society is being suppressed, being removed, such that it's not able to cause that harm that we expect it to wreak, as it were. And these are all very, very nuanced, very complex discussions that we'll have to have. And it's not going to be simple. We're obviously going to have many, many circumstances where some of these discussions are based on individual cultures, individual mores, and whether we have an international agreement on what some of these things are or not, it's going to take us a lot of time to come around and resolve it. Now, there are some recommendations that we could start implementing now as this technology is coming about. Obviously, ensuring that we have a proper amount and level of AI literacy, much as we implement internet literacy back in the early 90s, 2000s. Um, and in many senses, we are still proliferating that internet literacy today to populations around the globe. Another aspect is to try and de-incentivize organizations from developing solely affirmative systems. Try to give them an incentive to add in a bit of that refutation, a bit of that disagreement, so that we can challenge people's worldviews and we can prevent them from completely siloing themselves such that it's causing harm not only to society but to themselves as well. And then the last of it, obviously, is going to be embedding aspects of right to know, right not to know into existing legislature and regulatory frameworks. And that's not going to be fully easy to address. But if we can start building these notions into our societal obligations, maybe some of those more complex discussions that I alluded to earlier will be easier to tackle. Now, running over time here, so I'm just going to leave the contact, the bibliography here. So I'll be running around the gather room and will be available for questions if you guys need me. So thank you for your time and hope to chat with you soon.